3 days before my wedding became a nightmare, I was only a waitress. Someone powerful people were trained not to see. Then Tae-jin Seo walked in, the most feared mafia boss in the city, and the father of the man I loved.
I was forced to marry my fiancé's father, but the Korean mafia boss fell madly in love with me. Say it. Call me your husband. I was supposed to marry his son. Now his father was forcing me to marry him instead. You stole me from your own son, I whispered. I take what I want, he said, and I want you. 3 days ago, I was a waitress. I fell in love with the wrong man's son, and the most feared mafia boss in the city decided he'd rather have me than let his son keep me. His family looked at me like I was dirt he'd tracked in. He'll get bored, Seo-yeon told me. Your kind always gets thrown away. They all thought I had nothing, but they never asked whose granddaughter I really was. The Seo empire was dying. Tae-jin needed one thing to save it, an alliance with the Baek dynasty. The oldest money in the country. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the Baek fortune had one secret heir, me. The man forcing me to marry him was about to find out the waitress he stole owned the very alliance he was killing his family to get. He thought he was taking everything from me. He had no idea he'd just married the one person who could destroy him. Or save him. Here's what's about to happen. Step 1. The forced wedding that broke my silence. A father stealing his son's bride. Step 2. The humiliation his family built, certain a waitress could be crushed. Step 3 is where everything changes, because the paper in my hand proves his empire was never his to save. It was mine to give. Step 4. The moment the coldest man alive realizes he fell in love with the one woman holding his whole world in her fist. And step 5. The moment I stop being his prize and choose myself. Stay with me. Because the monster who forced me to marry him is going to fall so hard, so completely, that he ends up on his knees begging the god he never believed in. And by then, I'll already hold everything. My name is Adaeze. People call me Ada. And 3 days before I stood at that altar, in a dress I never chose, as I was nobody anyone in that world would have looked at twice, I was a waitress. A good one. I worked private events, the kind rich people throw behind tall gates where you pour the wine, keep your eyes down, and disappear. It paid the bills while I figured out the rest of my life. I had a small apartment, a mountain of quiet dreams, and a secret I'd spent my whole life keeping. I'll get to the secret. You need to understand the rest first. I met Tae-jin Seo at one of those events. He wasn't like the others. While the rest of the guests treated the staff like furniture, he actually saw me. He carried a tray back to the kitchen for me when my hands were full. He asked my name and remembered it. He stayed late just to talk. Min-jun was the son of the most powerful crime family in the city, the Seo organization. Old feared the kind of name people said carefully, with their voices low. But Min-jun himself was gentle, soft almost. He hated the world he was born into. And maybe that's why we fit. Two people standing at the edge of a life that wasn't quite ours. We fell in love the way you do when you're young and stupid and sure the world will make room for you. 3 months in, he got down on one knee in my tiny kitchen and asked me to marry him. I said yes. I should have. A family like that would never allow it. But I was in love, and love makes you forget who's holding the gun. The night of the engagement dinner, I met his father for the first time, Tae-jin Seo. He walked into that room and the temperature dropped. Everyone went quiet. He was younger than I expected for a man his age, sharp, lean, dangerous, with a dragon tattoo crawling up the side of his neck and eyes that didn't blink enough. He was the kind of handsome that scares you. The kind of man who's done things he'll never wash off. He looked at me across that dinner table for one long moment, and something in his face changed. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now, he'd decided. 2 days later, Min-jun didn't answer my calls. When I finally got through, his voice was wrong, flat, broken, like someone had hollowed him out. "Ada," he said, "don't come to the house, please." My father. The line went dead. That night, a black car pulled up outside my apartment. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't threaten me. They didn't have to. They simply said, "Mr. Seo requests your presence," and held the door open. and I understood that the word crests meant something very different in their world. They drove me to the Seo mansion, and in a study that smelled like cigars and money, Tae-jin Seo slid a document across his desk toward me. I looked down. It was a marriage certificate. My name was on it, and the groom's name wasn't Minjun. It was his. "You can't do this," I said. My voice was shaking. "I'm engaged to your son." "Were," Tae-jin said. He didn't even look up. "My son has many fine qualities. Holding on to what's his isn't one of them." He finally raised those cold eyes to mine. "I saw you, and I don't share. I won't sign it. You will." He leaned back. "Because your parents have a mortgage they can't pay, and a daughter who's about to make a very powerful enemy. Or a very powerful friend. Your choice." There it was, the chain. The thing men like him always reach for, the people you love, held just out of reach, so that every choice you make is really no choice at all. So I married my fiancé's father. In a ballroom full of white roses and people who hated me, with Minjun held back by guards at the rear of the room, his face a portrait of everything we'd lost. And as I stood there in that dress, clutching a certificate with the wrong name on it, the most feared man in the city leaned close to my ear and said the words that started everything. "Now you're mine. Say it. Call me your husband." It was the deepest betrayal I had ever felt. Not just a man stealing his son's bride, but a whole room of powerful people watching it happen and deciding I deserved it. The public humiliation of standing there, a waitress in a stolen wedding dress, while 300 eyes judged me, burned hotter than anything. They wanted me to break in front of all of them. What they didn't know was that I don't break in public, I plan. The Seo mansion became my prison, a beautiful one. I had a wing of my own, closets the size of my old apartment, filled with clothes I never asked for, jewellery that arrived in velvet boxes every morning, a staff that called me Madame with their eyes on the floor, and I hated all of it. Tae-jin's idea of love was ownership. He didn't know any other way. He'd grown up in a world where everything had a price and everything could be taken, and so he tried to take me the only way he understood, by burying me in things. The morning after the wedding, a woman from his staff brought in a tray of jewellery boxes. "Gifts from Mr. Seo," she said. "Hand-picked. This one." She opened a box with something that glittered like frozen starlight. "This belonged to a duchess. Mr. Seo said you'd outshine her." I picked up the box, I looked at it, and I set it back down. "Take it away," I said. "All of it." The woman blinked. "Madam, these are worth more than—" "I know exactly what they're worth," I said. "And I'm telling you money can't buy me." "You can tell him I said that. Because here's the thing they didn't understand about me. The thing my secret had taught me my whole life. I had grown up around more money than any of them would ever see. And I had watched it destroy everyone who touched it. I knew exactly how little it bought. I'll tell you the secret now, because you've earned it. My mother was the daughter of Chairman Baek. If that name means nothing to you, let me put it this way. The Baek dynasty was the oldest, deepest money in the entire country. Banks, shipping, real estate on 3 continents. The kind of fortune that doesn't show off because it doesn't need to. The Seo organization, for all its guns and fear, was a neighborhood operation next to the Baek Empire. And my mother had walked away from all of it. She'd fallen in love with my father, a kind, ordinary black man from another country, a man her family deemed beneath the Baek name. When she refused to leave him, Chairman Baek, my grandfather, gave her a choice, the man. She chose the man. She gave up the name, the fortune, everything, and she raised me in a small house full of love and no money at all. But before she died, she gave me one thing, a folded document and a heavy gold seal, the Baek family seal, the one that authorizes the dynasty's most important decisions. And she told me, "Your grandfather is a hard man, Ada, but blood is blood. If you are ever truly cornered, if you ever have nowhere left to turn, you take this to him. You are still his heir. He just doesn't know you yet." I'd carried that seal for years and never used it. I was too proud. I wanted to build my own life, not run to a grandfather who'd let my mother walk away. But the day Tae-jin slid that certificate across his desk, I slipped the Baek seal into the lining of my bag. Because I had a feeling I was going to need it. The waitress they were all sneering at. She was the secret heir to a fortune that could buy and sell to the Seo family 10 times over. My whole life I'd kept that secret identity buried, ashamed of the money that had broken my family. But I was starting to realize the hidden identity reveal I'd spent years running from might be the only weapon I had left. They just didn't know it yet. For the first 2 weeks, I played quiet. I let them think they'd won. I let Tae-jin believe his terrified little waitress wife was settling into her cage. Because I'd learned something a long time ago. The longer they believe you're powerless, the harder the fall when they find out the truth. But Tae-jin made sure I understood the rules. Your parents are comfortable, he told me one evening, over a dinner I didn't touch. Their mortgage is paid. They have everything they need. As long as you behave, he sipped his wine. Run, embarrass me, defy me in front of my family, and all of that comfort disappears. Do you understand? I understand, I said quietly. He thought he was holding the leash. He had no idea I was measuring him for one. His family was worse than he was, in some ways, because Tae-jin, for all his cruelty, had at least chosen me. His family looked at me like a stain. At dinners, his aunts and cousins spoke about me in the third person, as if I couldn't hear. Where did he even find her? A waitress. Can you imagine the bloodline? She won't last, they never do. And then there was Seo Yeon. Seo Yeon was the woman the family had wanted Tae-jin to marry. Beautiful, cold, from a connected family, and absolutely certain that I was a temporary embarrassment she only had to wait out. She floated through that mansion like she already owned it. She touched Tae-jin's arm in front of me. She smiled at me with all her teeth. You know he only took you to spite his son, don't you? She said to me one afternoon in the garden where no one could hear. Men like Tae-jin don't love, they collect, and when they're bored, they discard. She leaned close. You're not a wife, you're a tantrum, and tantrums end. I looked at her for a long moment and I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. You might be right, I said. But if I'm just a tantrum, why does it bother you so much that I'm here? Her smile cracked just slightly, and I walked away, and I felt her eyes burning into my back the whole way. If you've ever walked into a room where everyone decided you were beneath them, and kept your chin up anyway, drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I need to know I'm not the only one who's been the tantrum they couldn't wait out. Here's the thing that confused me most in those early weeks. Tae-jin was a monster. I'd seen what he did to people who crossed him. The whole city was afraid of him. He ruled his family through fear, and the fear was earned. But he was never cruel to me. In fact, it was the opposite, and it was almost worse because it made him harder to hate. One night, one of the kitchen staff, a sharp-tongued woman who resented serving a waitress wife, said something vicious to me in the hall. Called me trash. Called me a gold digger who'd clawed her way up from pouring drinks. She didn't know Tae-jin was around the corner. He came around that corner like winter. Say it again, he said very quietly. The woman went white. Sir, You think because I found her serving wine, you can speak to her like she's beneath you. His voice never rose. That was the terrifying part. She is my wife. You will get on your knees and beg her forgiveness, or you will not work in this city again. Choose! The woman dropped to her knees. She begged. She wept. And I stood there horrified, not at her but at him, at the cold, total violence in a man who would destroy a person's whole life for being rude to me. Stop, I told him. Enough. She didn't hurt me. Let her go. He looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. She insulted you. And you're about to ruin her life over words, I said. That's not protecting me. That's just you, being cruel and putting my name on it. I never asked for this. Something moved behind his eyes. Confusion. He genuinely didn't understand. In his world, you answered disrespect with destruction. The idea that mercy might be strength, not weakness, it had never once occurred to him. Let her go, I said again, softer. For me, if you want to do something for me, do that. And he did. He waved the woman away, and he stood there looking at me, like he was seeing something he'd never seen before. That was the first crack. The first time the monster looked at me and saw not a possession, but a person who operated by rules he didn't have. Why? He asked me later. She hates you. Why protect her? Because I'd rather be kind and free than powerful and cruel, I said. You have all the power in the world, Tae-jin, and you're the loneliest man I've ever met. Doesn't that tell you something? He didn't answer, but he didn't forget it either. Minjun found me 3 weeks in. He'd bribed a guard, slipped into the garden at night, and when I came out for air, he was there in the dark, looking like a ghost of the boy I'd almost married. Ada, he breathed. God, Ada, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I couldn't stop him. I tried. It's not your fault, I said, and it wasn't. We'd both been crushed by the same machine. Come with me, he said, gripping my hands. Right now. I have a car. We'll disappear. I have money saved. We'll go somewhere he can't reach. We'll start over. And for 1 second I wanted to. I wanted to run back to the simple life I'd had. The gentle boy. The dream that almost was. But I thought about my parents. I thought about the chain around all our throats. And I thought about something else, too. Something I was only just starting to understand. Running wasn't winning. Running just meant living the rest of my life afraid. Minjun, I said gently, if we run, he'll spend the rest of his life hunting us. He'll hurt my family. He'll never stop. You know him better than I do. You know that's true. So what? We just give up? No, I said. We don't run from him. We take everything he has. And then he can't touch us, because we'll be holding the leash. Minjun stared at me. Ada, he's the most powerful man in the city. You're a waitress? I smiled. Minjun, there's something about me you don't know. Something nobody knows. I squeezed his hands. Trust me. Go home, stay safe, and watch what happens when they finally find out who they really married into their family. He didn't understand, but he went. What I didn't know was that Seo Yeon had been watching from a window, and by the next morning, she'd told Tae-jin that his son had come to steal his wife in the night. The war between father and son, over me, was about to explode. Tae-jin's jealousy was a terrible thing to witness. He dragged Minjun into the main hall the next day. Guards everywhere, his whole family watching, and for the first time I saw real danger in his eyes. Not the cold control he usually wore, but something raw and out of his depth. My own son, he said, sneaking into my house to take my wife. She was mine first, Minjun shouted. You stole her. You steal everything. You don't even love her. You just couldn't stand that I had something good. Tae-jin hit him. Once, Minjun went down, and I saw a guard's hand move toward his weapon. And I understood that this could end with Minjun, dead on the marble, and I did the only thing I could think of. I threw myself between them. Stop! I put my body in front of Minjun, my back to the guns, facing the most dangerous man in the city. If you want to hurt him, you go through me first. The room went dead silent. Tae-jin stared at me. Move, Ada. No. My voice shook, but I didn't move. You want to know the difference between you and me, Tae-jin? I'll stand in front of a bullet for someone I love. You've never loved anyone enough to take so much as a scratch for them. So go ahead, shoot your son. But you'll have to kill me to do it, and then you'll have exactly what you've always had. Nothing. An empty house and a name people are afraid of. Something broke in his face. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Then Tae-jin turned and walked out of the room. He couldn't do it. With me standing there, he couldn't do it. And that was the moment I knew. The monster had a crack in him, and the crack was me. Later, Seo Yeon found me, and her mask was finally off. You think you've won something? She hissed. You're going to get that boy killed. You're going to get yourself killed. Tae-jin doesn't love he obsesses, and obsession curdles. The moment you stop being a challenge, he'll throw you in the dirt where he found you. Maybe, I said. But I notice you're shaking, Seo Yeon. You're terrified. Because you came into this house certain I was nothing. And somewhere along the way, you started to suspect you were wrong about me. I stepped closer. You should be afraid. You just don't know the half of it yet. Comment the word unbreakable if you've ever had someone try to convince you that you were powerless, while you quietly held the one card that changed everything. Tell me. I need to know I'm not the only one who let them keep talking. Here's where everything flips. So stay with me. The Seo Empire, for all its fear and power, was dying. I'd pieced it together from overheard phone calls, from the stress lines deepening on Tae-jin's face, from the way the family's whispers had shifted from contempt for me to fear about money. The organization was drowning in debt. Rival families were circling, and Tae-jin had exactly one move left to save everything his family had built: an alliance with the Baek dynasty, the oldest, deepest money in the country. If Tae-jin could secure Baek backing, the Seo empire would be untouchable. The rivals would scatter. The debts would vanish. He'd been chasing that alliance for a year, sending emissaries, getting nowhere, because the Baek dynasty didn't deal with criminals. He was killing himself to win the favor of a family that wouldn't return his calls. And he had married, and was slowly, helplessly falling in love with, the secret heir to that exact fortune. The night I understood the full shape of it, I almost laughed out loud. The audacity of it. Tae-jin had stolen me to spite his son, buried me in jewelry, locked me in his gilded cage, and the entire time, the woman he'd dismissed as a waitress was the one person on earth who could hand him the only thing he truly needed. Or take it away forever. I made a phone call, not to Tae-jin, to a number my mother had made me memorize as a girl. A private line. It rang twice, and then an old voice answered. A voice I'd never heard but somehow recognized in my blood. "Who is this?" Chairman Baek said. "My name is Adaeze," I said. "My mother was your daughter. And I think it's time you met your granddaughter." There was a long silence on the line. The silence of an old, hard man hearing the voice of the child he'd lost coming back to him through her daughter. "You have the seal," he said finally. Not a question. "I have the seal." "Then come home, child," he said, and his hard voice cracked just slightly. "Come home and tell me who has dared to cage my blood." The waitress they all laughed at had just called the most powerful man in the country grandfather. And here's the shocking twist that none of them ever saw coming. The alliance Tae-jin was destroying his family to win, and the woman he'd caged in a bedroom were the same person. My revenge wasn't going to be loud. It wasn't going to be a scream or a fight. It was going to be a quiet, total power reversal. The kind where they don't even realize the ground has moved until they're already falling. The comeback was about to begin. I didn't run from the Seo mansion. I walked out the front door. I told the guards I was visiting family. They didn't dare stop the boss's wife, and a Baek car, long, black, silent, the kind of car that makes Seo's fleet look like toys, was waiting at the gate. My grandfather was a hard man, exactly as my mother had warned. But when I walked into his study and he saw my face, my mother's face, something in him that had been frozen for 25 years cracked open. We talked for hours, about my mother, about the years he'd wasted on his pride, about the cage I'd been put in. And when I told him everything, the forced marriage, the stolen wedding, the threats against my parents, the whole ugly story, the warmth drained out of his face and something colder took its place. "The Seo organization wants my alliance," he said softly. "They have been begging for it for a year, and all this time they had my granddaughter locked in a bedroom." He stood. "Let me show you, child, what your name actually means. Here is what happened over the next week, and I want you to understand that I made every decision. First, my grandfather and I, together, bought the Seo organization's debt. All of it. Every loan, every marker, every IOU the family owed across the city. The Baek dynasty quietly purchased it all. In a single week, the Seo empire didn't owe money to a dozen scattered creditors anymore. It owed everything to me. Second, I had my lawyer, Mr. Han, draw up the documents. Clean, legal, airtight. The controlling interest in everything the Seo family had. Their businesses, their holdings, the very mansion I'd been caged in, now sat in a Baek holding company. And the sole heir to that holding company was me. Third, I came back. I walked back into that mansion a week after I'd left, and the whole family was assembled in the main hall, because Tae-jin had been frantic. His wife had vanished. His empire's creditors had all gone silent in a way that terrified him, and he didn't understand why. He stood up when he saw me, relief and fury at war on his face. "Ada, where the hell did you? Sit down, Tae-jin," I said, and something in my voice, calm as a tun, the voice of a woman who is no longer afraid, made him actually pause, mister. Han stepped in beside me and opened his briefcase, and laid the documents on the long table, one after another, in front of the whole family. Let me make this simple, I said, so nobody has to read the fine print. The debt that's been strangling this family, I own it. The alliance with the Baek dynasty you've been begging for a year. I am the Baek dynasty, the heir you couldn't get a meeting with. I let it land. You forced her to marry your father in a stolen wedding, and then you let your family call her a waitress to her face. The room was so silent I could hear the chandelier humming. Seo-yeon's wineglass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble. The aunts who'd sneered at my bloodline went the colour of ash, because they understood, all at once, that the bloodline they'd mocked was older and richer and more powerful than their entire world. And Tae-jin stared at the documents, then at me, like a man watching the ground disappear from under his feet. You, he said. All this time you were. The one person who could save you, I said. Or end you, yes. I gathered the papers. You spent a year killing yourself to win an alliance with my family. And you had me locked in a bedroom the whole time, too busy treating me like a possession to ever once ask who I really was. The face slap of it, the sheer, total reversal, landed on every person in that room at once. The waitress they'd all looked through held the deed to their entire world. I could have destroyed them. I want you to understand that. I held every card. I could have called in the debt and dissolved the Seo organization overnight. Put the whole cruel family out on the street, left Tae-jin with nothing but the name people feared. My grandfather honestly wanted me to. Say the word, he told me, and the Seo name is gone by morning. But I didn't, not because they deserved mercy. Because I'd learned something my mother taught me a long time ago. Karma doesn't need you to be cruel. It just needs you to stop protecting people from the consequences of who they are. So here's what I did instead. I removed Seo-yeon first, the woman who'd called me a tantrum, who'd promised I'd be thrown in the dirt. I simply made it known, with the full weight of the Baek name, that she was no longer welcome in any room that mattered. She'd built her whole life on proximity to power. I took the power away and let her fall on her own. She walked out of that mansion with exactly what she'd tried to leave me with. Nothing. The other woman got the ending she'd written for me. I freed my parents from the chain completely, paid off their mortgage myself, with my own money now, Baek money, and made sure, with one quiet message delivered by my grandfather, that the Seo family understood that any threat to my parents was a threat to the Baek dynasty, and would be answered accordingly. The chain that had held me was gone. And Tae-jin? This is the part nobody saw coming, least of all me. The man fell apart. Not because he'd lost his empire. He hadn't, not yet. That was still in my hands to decide. He fell apart because he finally understood what he'd done, that he'd taken a woman by force, caged her, treated her like a thing to be owned, and that she'd turned out to be the one person who'd ever stood in front of a bullet for someone, the one person whose mercy he couldn't comprehend, the one person he'd actually, helplessly, fallen in love with, and that he'd destroyed any chance of her ever loving him back with his own two hands. The most feared man in the city, a man who'd never believed in anything but power, started showing up at the small church near my grandfather's estate. My grandfather's people told me. At first I didn't believe it, but it was true. The killer the whole city feared knelt in a church, for hours, day after day. He donated a fortune to rebuild it. He paid to school children who had nothing. And when my father's old house needed repairs, Tae-jin showed up himself. No guards, no suit, just a man with his sleeves rolled up, and fixed the leaking roof, and trimmed the garden, and worked until he could barely stand. For me, a woman he knew would probably never forgive him. Why? I asked him. The day I finally went to see him. He was on his knees in that empty church, and he didn't even hear me come in. You've lost. You know I hold everything. Begging God won't change the documents. So why? He looked up at me, and the cold was gone from his face. What was left was just a man who'd finally understood the size of what he'd thrown away. I'm not begging for the empire, he said. I don't care about the empire. I'm begging because I spent my whole life believing power was the only thing that was real. And then I met a woman who had every reason to break. And instead she stood in front of a bullet and showed mercy to people who hated her, and she was stronger than me. stronger than all my guns and all my fear, and I was too much of a monster to deserve her. His voice broke. I don't want your forgiveness, Ada. I know I can't have it. I just needed to become someone who would have deserved it, even if it's too late. And I'll be honest with you, bestie. That cracked something in me too. I'd spent weeks bracing for him to fight me, to claw for his empire, to be the monster to the very end. I never once braced for this, for the coldest man alive to kneel on a stone floor and mean every word. It didn't undo what he'd done, but it told me the impossible had happened. The monster had actually changed. I want to tell you that I fell into his arms and the monster was healed by love, and we lived happily ever after. But that's not what happened, because this was never his redemption story. It was mine. Here's what I actually did. I kept control of the Seo empire, legally, completely mine, but I didn't run it like Tae-jin had. I started pulling it into the light, cutting loose the parts that hurt people, keeping the parts that were clean, using the Baek fortune to turn a criminal organization into something that didn't need to be feared anymore. The thing Tae-jin could never do, because he only understood power, I did. Because I understood something he never had. I reconciled with my grandfather. 25 years my mother had been cut off, and I got to be the bridge back. Not for the money, but because he was the last family I had, and because my mother would have wanted her hard, proud father to finally have someone to love. That was a homecoming I didn't know I needed, Minjun. I set free in the best way. The gentle boy who hated his father's world. I made sure he never had to live in it again. He got to walk away from all of it, with my blessing, and build the quiet life he'd always wanted. We were never going to be what we almost were. But I loved him enough to let him go free. And the real glow-up? It had nothing to do with the empire or the Baek fortune, or any of it. For my whole life, I'd hidden who I was. I'd been ashamed of the money that destroyed my family, afraid of the name, certain I had to be small to be safe. I'd let the Seo family put me in an apron in their minds and a cage in their house, and convince me I was nobody. And when I finally stood up to my full height, when I stopped hiding the Baek blood, stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped letting anyone tell me what a waitress was allowed to be, I didn't just take an empire. I got myself back. People who'd known me as the quiet waitress wife didn't recognize the woman who walked into rooms now. Not because I looked different, because I'd finally stopped pretending to be smaller than I was. The waitress they forced into a stolen wedding walked away with everything, not because she took it, because it was always hers, the blood, the fortune, the strength, the choice. She just spent her whole life letting other people convince her it wasn't. The moment she remembered it was, she won. As for Tae-jin, I didn't destroy him, and I didn't marry him. I left him exactly where he'd put himself, a man who'd torn his own life apart, who finally understood what love was on the day he lost any right to it, running a fraction of an empire he now knew had never really been his. Whether the changed man he became ever earns a second chance, that's a story for another day, and it'll be on my terms, in my time, if I decide he's earned it. Because I'm not a prize to be won anymore. I'm the one who decides. Here's what that stolen wedding taught me. They forced me into a dress I never chose, in front of a room full of people who'd decided I was beneath them. And they were so busy looking down on me that not one of them ever looked closely enough to see what I was actually holding. That's the thing about being underestimated. The world will try to tell you it's the same as being worthless. It is not. Being overlooked means you don't matter. Being underestimated means you matter so much that the people around you can't afford to see it yet. They put me in an apron in their minds and a cage in their house. And being the person they refused to see clearly turned out to be the most powerful position in the room. Because nobody guards against the woman they've already decided is nothing. A man tried to own me, and he learned the oldest lesson there is. You cannot possess a person. You can cage her body. You can bury her in jewels. You can force her name onto a certificate, and you will still never hold her, because the only thing that was ever real was the choice she made about who to be, and that choice was never his. It was always only mine. So the next time someone forces you into a corner and decides you're powerless, I need you to remember something. The woman they refuse to see clearly is very often the only person in the room who holds the whole game in her hand. Don't beg the people who caged you to love you. Walk out the door into your own name on your own terms, and let them spend the rest of their lives wondering how the waitress they looked down on ended up holding everything. Question before you go. If someone once tried to force you into being small, what's the one thing you'd say to them now that you know your own worth? Put it in the comments. I want to read every single one.